Hi guys, CanadienSaintNk. Today we're testing Poisonous Lobbers, and they're still not fixed patch, which is something they took out a year ago, which is the ability for Poison Lobbers to detonate propane tanks. As you can imagine, that's a little bit troublesome because they have a much shallower arc than purple lobbers do. This causes them to throw a lot more in trap tunnels themselves. You see it a lot of times when you're inside of a cave. They'll throw lots and lots of yellow lobs at you. There's no real way around it. We have seen purple lobbers destroy propane tanks. That's always been a thing. It's just pretty rare for it to happen because they have to hit it almost directly. It's more noticeable, I think, when flingers do their melee in the trap tunnels, that they'll knock propanes away sometimes. Sometimes you might see, or you might not see, but a flinger, I should say, will throw a purple lob, and sometimes it bounces off the walls in your trap tunnel. It hasn't happened recently. That was probably an issue about 6 or 7 months ago. That they, I don't know if they did a small patch or fix on it, but it seemed to fix the AI itself. But about a year ago or so, they took out the ability for purple lobbers to detonate propane tanks. This was probably an oversight on their part. I guess they didn't really expect, that kind of level of. That patrol doesn't have any propanes either that I could show you. That they don't have that kind of level of destructibility in their trap tunnels. For instance, in a retrieve the data, we see multiple waves of enemies from, they go from propanes to yellow lobbers to mist monsters to smashers, etc., etc. In this instance, we would see, propanes come, they would destroy, a lot of your base and retrieve the data. If you're familiar with the game mode, it's a very compact build, and there's not much room to defend. You get a lot of propanes at certain times, and it's very difficult to keep your base intact unless you're, relatively overpowered. That's fine, it's a challenging mode, good for it. But the problem then comes when you're killing all these propanes. You're trying to kill them before they get to the base because you're trying to limit as much damage as possible to the base itself. There's not really a whole lot of option to kill the propanes before they get to your base without significantly doing a dent in your resources.
Wish I could.
So what ends up happening is, you have all these propanes left over, but there's still parts of the base that need to be rebuilt. So, in this little 2-minute window after that, the wave's still spawning, but propanes aren't coming, so you kind of rely on what traps are left to kill the wave. We see lobbers spawning, but not purple lobbers, just yellow lobbers. And just yellow lobbers is, kind of the mentality that I had. There, because I want another yellow lobber.
Yeah, I see you.
Come on, so now you're rebuilding your base, and these yellow lobbers, which are with a much shallower arc that can shoot into propane tunnels themselves, are spawning in. And now we see that they're hitting the propane tanks. So the base that you are just rebuilding, haven't had a chance to reinforce because no building speed is that fast, unless you're building with wood, maybe with stone. We now see that they're spawning in, they're blowing up these propane tanks. So this is obviously kind of a glaring oversight. The fact that it was in the game before they took it out for this exact reason, and now they're putting it back in, it kind of speaks to making the same mistakes again. Is obviously very worrisome. Obviously they've done a lot over the past 4 or 5 months. Speaks to a lot of hope, if you will. And this is kind of like another step back, which is pretty much all too familiar for long-time Save the World players.
You serious?
So without further ado, I guess I'll just show you what happens when they hit a propane tank. I'm just trying to get close to, because I know if they hit it directly, it's going to detonate, and I'm fairly certain if they hit, semi-proximity with their poison gas, it'll detonate as well. So I'm just seeing if I could get them to throw at it itself. Well, proximity. I'm not trying to get too close to it. because then of course then they'll directly hit it. If I just go in proximity, maybe this will work. I'm not sure if it will, but maybe it will. They could also be like standard AI, where they always target like where you're gonna move. So maybe I shouldn't. Maybe I shouldn't go in a circular motion. Oh, see, that one didn't hit directly. You see, it hit off to the side a little bit. So that's what worries me, is that the poison gas itself will detonate the propane tanks again. I saw this a year ago, and it was absolutely horrifying. It lasted about 2 weeks before they took it out. That was back when they had nearly full staff. So I worry about how long this is going to go before players start complaining about it, before it becomes, you know, a pretty common thing. It's going to make clearing Frost Knight, say, you know, 128 challenge very difficult. I imagine Allura, who's streaming right now, is probably having some challenges with that to some degree. But this is bad, guys. It's not, you know, exactly game breaking. Like, missions are still going to be completed because we have perked up weapons and we're already super overpowered. The game was meant to be cleared with the weapons that we had and perks that we had. And now we have our custom perk set that we could then level up even further. That was a direct hit. Gonna drag these guys over to the center map, slowly but surely. So now we have our own custom set of perks, and everything's supercharged now. Yeah, there's no real way around it. If I could drag these guys down. They did all this because, you know, a lot of people complain that, you know, oh, I was having trouble killing smashers as a ninja, you know, outlanders were pretty useless, etc., kind of things, right? And it was understandable why they did it, that, you know, they wanted to make the game, you know, a little bit less challenging for everybody.
So many husks.
I lost that one. But the problem with this is that it disturbed the balance of the game. The balance of the game was, you know, it was supposed to be a sandbox kind of game. You could kind of build your own defenses, and then you could go from there. But now, obviously, the focus is more on shooting. There are some players who simply just don't build, period, which is, you know, it's fine. You don't need to build by any stretch. But the problem is, you know, when they come up with these 128 modes, now you need to build, and now you can't, right? So a lot of players are like, oh yeah, this is interesting now, right? 'Cause it's a challenge at that point, and it is a challenge at that point. But then they leave other exploits, you know, like the floor launchers, never really intended to cause fall damage, but now they are. And it can't really be reasoned that they should fix it, because, you know, at the same time, you know, launchers themselves were meant to increase with this, you know, they were meant to increase 1 square or so. Do these propanes despawn? Is that a thing? No, there's one. Where's this one then? Guess it fades through the map. It's got 3 propane tanks over here. We'll continue the test over here, see if we get a proximity explosion. Hey, Belgian Dan. Nice to see you show up again. We're just testing some propanes. So, you know, it was meant to make them build more, and it's exciting that it's challenging to build more, but the floor launchers, being meant to throw them that high and cause fall damage, probably never intended. Shoot, where'd she go?
Double jump.
The literal worst. Anyways, I guess you guys can kind of tell. Anyways. No, it's just a cannon. That's too bad. But you saw it on the first one. But maybe we'll get lucky. We'll spawn some yellow lobbers here. What was I talking about? I was talking about Frost Knight, traps, challenging, yeah. Unintended floor launcher, launch height. They shouldn't be launched that high in the old version of the game unless they reach, you know, level 178 or so. So it's definitely something that wasn't intended. And even if, you know, even if they had planned up to level 178 at that point, it's almost worth it just to nerf the distance that they could do it, because the world itself isn't ready for that kind of distance on a launcher. Like if we use a wall launcher and launch them 5 squares away, potentially we could be looking at, you know, an infinite wave per se, and that would imbalance it in and of itself. So if it's imbalanced that way for wall launchers, it definitely should be for floor launchers too. That could then launch them 5 squares upwards into the air.
Where to go?
But you know, again, you leave things to stew and they'll come back to bite you, so to speak. So this time they did.
Bring it, bonehead.
Sweet, we got one.
Away.
She's not too far away, so that's nice.
Okay, here.
If I get her back over here. Stand between these two. But the problem, you know, then becomes they'll have great flights but bad landings. I still need to do my detonate challenge. Yeah. Okay, so that was 112% of proximity explosion. That was like very edge of the poison cloud, which is kind of unrefutable at this point. For those who are new to Fortnite and don't realize the problem with this, this was an issue that they had in the game a year ago. They took it out. They're reintroducing it, essentially, under the guise of, oh, this is new. And they didn't fix the reason why it was broken in the first place. And of course the reason was that poison clouds have a radius, and that radius instantly activates when they throw their proximity or their poisonous gas bomb. So when you have that deal damage to structures, since propanes count as structures or projectiles, whatever, you know, they have in their coding, it then detonates the propane tank. And because of the shallow throw arc of the yellow or the poisonous lobbers, however you like to call them, we end up seeing propanes detonate in trap tunnels for next to no reason. So this was obviously pretty game breaking back when the game was actually challenging. Probably not a big emphasis this time around because the game's a little bit less challenging. You'll only notice this kind of difficulty in the Frost Knight 128 mode. In essence, this will probably put even more of an emphasis on not having good trap diversity in your Frost Knight 128 builds, or, you know, whatever kind of challenging game mode they come out with in the future, because it won't matter, right? The simpler the build, the better, because once it's destroyed, you'll have to replace it all anyways. So in that essence, did she die already? In that essence, you know, the simple builds will win. And simple is always better to a degree, but when it's relying on, you know, kind of like a game-breaking exploit as far as the floor launchers, it's not really simple. It's just an exploit, right? It's not interesting. It's not challenging. It's not, you know, keying on what makes Fortnite diverse and unique in its own way, as far as being a sandbox game that you could, you know, a little bit like tower defense. You build your own defenses and defend versus endless waves of husk. And, you know, yeah, they could counter with, well, to each their own, but essentially it's not each their own. It's kind of them forcing us just to shoot everything at that point. But it's not possible to do in those kind of challenging modes. So this is what we end up with, you know, is essentially, I don't know if you guys remember, but 30 seconds ago there used to be four floor pieces there. If there were ceilings, if there were walls, it would be gone anyways, right? This is propanes, this is a challenging game mode, assuming this is like a challenge mode. So this is essentially all gone now, right? The 4 square radius, if you're in a challenge mode, it's very easy to lose upwards of, you know, 5-10 squares of trap tunnel very easily. So the more simple your trap tunnel is, the better it'll be at that point, which doesn't speak to the strength of Fortnite and its appeal to players at all. you want them to have more traps. You want them to have more trap diversity, because then, you know, then they're getting more traps. Then they're using more resources. They're playing the game more. They're, you know, interacting with teammates more potentially to cover the traps that they don't have. They're all these things, you know, kind of go into making the game. And for them to come out and reintroduce, you know, a mistake that they've made in the past,
Let's build.
it's not encouraging. It's very disheartening at this point, and that's Fortnite in general. It's kind of sad to see too, because obviously, you know, a year ago we were talking about Save the World being a game of the year, even before Battle Royale dropped, and now it's kind of fallen by the wayside for whatever reason. Obviously, it doesn't make nearly as much money as Battle Royale does. It's two different genres, two different, you know, approaches, two different, vastly different communities in and of itself. So there's, you know, you're not gonna hit the same demographic, but at the same time, the PvE community has proven time and time again that they're going to be a long time community, and we see it. You know, we see guys like Isherwood, Allura. You know, these guys have been playing near day one. We see other people pick it up because Battle Royale, and they kind of get hooked. You know, Wrathborn, Tytastic, you know, all these guys. They really enjoy the mode and the challenges that it can bring, as well as the potential. But at the same time, like, what we have left is this. You know, is you know, a dev team that is working their butts off, absolutely. But for what, right? Like, where's the communication, if you will, between? Because I mean, this shouldn't be happening a year down the line,